Welcome, Minakakis.
Thank you very much, and very happy to talk with you.
So I want to start with this question of why silence is so important to you.
As artists, our canvas in music is time, and for us to be able to create something meaningful, we need silence. Essentially, our music is interrupting silence, and I think that it must be very, very respectful of silence. There must be a very good reason to interrupt silence. Silences are one of the most important opportunities that we have to really listen to ourselves, and also to listen to the world around us, where we don't feel that pressure to talk all the time. We can be engaged as listeners. Also, for my music has a lot to do with memory, and it's not so much about me expressing personal memories. It's not autobiographical. It's more I'm trying to create spaces in which the listener can engage their own memories and bring those to the table, and that for that silence is necessary.
So when I listen to your music, I can hear the sounds of very organic and raw materials like crying, singing tones, and heartbeats. But on top of that, you also engage, just like you said, the themes of memories, the collective memories. You know, one movie I could resonate with is Memento. And it's very fragmented, but underlying there's a logical sense of all the logics and all the memories behind it. So what guides you to dive into all those deep and bigger pictures and thinkings?
You mentioned this idea of something that is fragmented but also has continuity. One of most inspiring poets for me was Greek poet Konstantin Kavafis, and he has a poem, it's called the Komisa Esti Techni, which is translated as I've brought to art. And he says that he's bringing to art memories of incomplete love affairs, things half glimpsed. But then art comes to complete whatever life has left incomplete. And it can do that in a way that is more perfect than life ever could. This is what I find so interesting. It's this kind of at least what motivates me to write is a sense of absence, something that is missing from your life, and art comes and fills in this absence in a much more perfect way than life ever could. So that is something that is really, really important to understand where I'm coming from, and why in my music there is all these kind of, let's say, islands of sound. But then when you experience the whole thing, you realize that there is perhaps a logic that connects things together. I heard from the great Japanese composer Toshio Sokawa that he was influenced by Japanese idea in calligraphy that the work of art starts with intention. Like when you pick up the brush, the work of art has started, and the visual product is the tip of the iceberg. The iceberg is much deeper. I try to capture that in my music. Like many times, it's those things that are missing, that are just as present in their absence. There is a wonderful a poet that I like very much, American poet Robert Lowell. He has a perhaps not so well-known poem about Beethoven, and he says about Beethoven that for those with good ears, hearing is torture. It shows how important this kind of audiation, this kind of being able to listen to what you have inside you during moments of silence in art.
I think silence is so important because it can filter some of the noises and the sound that you cannot distinguish. So I think as musician and also as a human being, we need to distinguish each different voices that in your mind and your hearts. And also, I think the poet you mentioned, Kavavi, he is very special and very unique. he also would get rid of a lot of the adjectives and really get into the essence of the core. So I guess that's maybe what resonates to the readers nowadays. And very interesting that he didn't publish a lot of the works before he passed. Before he
Yeah,
passed
and
away.
Cavafy is also like another interesting case. Like if you
Yeah.
look at his early work, is not as personal as the later work, and it seems to me uh, that he was really trying to. A lot of his early work is somewhat derivative of 19th century poets, and I think this was done on purpose because he was trying to understand how our art works. He wasn't. By any kind of measure, he was one of the most innovative poets of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. But he spent all this time to understand how older poetry worked.
Right.
And I think that sometimes, because we have this mandate of innovation, that sometimes we don't appreciate the fact that innovation requires a lot of time and it requires a lot of understanding of what has come before us, so that we can discover that voice that is meaningful to us and will allow us to create personal and unique and beautiful things.
One of your featured composition, The Crossing,
Yeah.
I think this is one of the best choir piece in the contemporary music. And you put a footnote aside of it, which is quoted from T.S. Eliot's There's Water, But No Rock. What's the personal story behind this?
Yes, so it was 2015. We happened to be with my family at the island of Lesbos, attending a friend's wedding. That was the time where the Syrian refugee crisis was at its worst. And you could see like little flimsy boats come from the coast of Turkey, landing with dozens of refugees who were wandering about the island. It was also a time where Greece was at the worst time of the financial crisis. The banks were closing. You had this impression that every single thing that you knew in the world was one or two bad decisions before total collapse. As I was watching all these people come marching the mountainous terrain of the island, trying to find access to a port, society not really being able to negotiate yet what to do with these people. Lots of them looked exactly like our families, like small children, all that. It was really, really shocking experience, and you felt this kind of isolation, devastation, like very much like in T.S. Eliot, The Wasteland. Actually, my wife brought this up. This devastation and this sense of hopelessness, if you wish. And then, but the one thing that I felt uniting in this was the experience of being refugee. That is an experience certainly that resonates with Greek people. About I think at least a third of the Greek population are refugees from other lands. So this idea of losing the homeland is a trope that's very familiar to Greeks of the mainland and the diaspora as well. Also, I think as artists, we kind of need to be refugees. I'm not the first person to say that. One of my compositional heroes, Yannis Xenakis, said that the artist must constantly be an immigrant, meaning that the minute that you start to feel comfortable about something that you're creating, or let's say you're a performer, like you feel comfortable in your technique or you have accomplished a few things, this is perhaps the time to start thinking about the next step. Don't ever settle and feel comfortable. Always be a nomad. And look forward, look west.
Yeah, I think the characters and also the core of being deep sympathy to the humankind is very necessary as a composer and musician nowadays, and which I guess this is a missing piece in a lot of the young generation of students nowadays.
I see sometimes that we are very, especially now in this country, but also in Europe, I'm familiar with, there is a sense of people getting entrenched into different categories. But I think reality is going to force us to adjust, because a lot of the problems that we're currently facing are international in nature. We are facing horrific wars right now with a threat of much bigger repercussions, and we are already starting to face environmental crisis, and that these are types of problems that require solutions that are going to force us to leave our trenches and kind of talk to each other. I think that that is really important to recognize the universality of certain human experiences, and also to recognize that a lot of the problems currently faced will require universal solutions.
When I listen to your music, there is a very deep introspective learning journey and also listening journey myself. And I noticed that you use a lot of the extension instrumental technique. What's the role of that in your composition journey?
I never think of extended techniques. I even tell my students that there's no such thing as extended technique, there is sound. And sound has characteristics. Yes, some of those sounds require playing instruments in unusual ways. But in 20 years from now, they will be usual. I'm thinking like how exotic multiphonics were maybe in the 1950s, and now there is pretty much every other contemporary music piece for woodwinds uses them. So what is important is what is the source of that sound. What is it that you're looking for? In my particular case, I have become very interested in this idea of a sound that has multiple temporal experiences. So, for example, a sound that you can perceive its surface, but also there's a shadow behind it. So, since you're a pianist, I wrote recently a set of 3 etudes, Lowell etudes, for a wonderful Korean pianist, Ji-hye Chung, wonderful collaborator of mine, and I think we'll have a relationship that is going to last for a long time. And I was thinking a lot about this idea of capturing techniques that capture an attack and also the sound of the attack. What exists in the piano inside the attack? How can we bring those sounds out? So I discovered a number of techniques where always there was this obsession that every single action must have this other shadowy presence behind it. So I never think like, oh, I read this technique manual, man, that multiphonic sounded cool, or I heard about clusters, or I saw this person do things. So I never think like that in exploring sound. I'm always thinking of expression. What is it that I'm trying to capture, and then going after it. And then sure, I will consult technical manuals, and more importantly, I will find the instrument myself and learn the basics of the instrument. We have at England Conservatory, where I teach, and from where you graduated, we have a wonderful instrument library who's very generous in lending out instruments to people that can't really play them,
I
like
didn't
me.
know that. Okay.
Yeah. So I am a frequent patron of that library. So I check out instruments. Sometimes I ask students for a little bit of help. How do I learn the basic fingerings for the instrument? And then I explore. And also collaborate with a performer that this is for. And I'm learning a lot about the instrument. So never think of extended sound. I say think about what is it, what kind of sounds are you interested in? What is that sound expressing? The sound is expression. What are you trying to express? And then find many different ways of doing this.
In the piece for Philippe, that was very surprising that you use this duality with the pressing of the keys, and also when at the end of the piece the player was doing without the mouthpiece. That was very beautiful and effective.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So when you collaborate with those instrumentalists, what do you think the relationship and the rules are there?
Yeah. So there is I'm glad you brought this up, because there is sometimes I think one of the biggest problems in music is that we have a 19th century heroic image of the performer or the composer. We have that image of like Paganini with the long hair, or Schumann in the mountain, like Manfred descending, thinking of the genius ideas and coming down. In reality, the way of working today is much more of an ecosystem. It's much more a community of specialists that each one brings their own imagination. So the kind of, first of all, I will not work well with all people. There's a certain kind of person that will work well with me, and I with them. It's a little bit like a friendship. So this particular saxophonist, Don Paul Kahl, is a person who has dedicated his entire energy into expanding what is possible for the saxophone. We discussed an idea I had for Felipe M, which was to explore all these micro nuances of sound that are possible. You know, like the saxophone has many keys, and in order to play in tune, it needs to employ like specific fingerings to play in tune with the piano. But what if we forget piano as a model for what intonation is? What if we look at the architecture of the instrument itself? So in a way, for Felipe M, the motive, compositional motive, is the instrument and its architecture. So we spent actually several months together, meeting pretty regularly in the summer months to explore all kinds of insane, like fingering combinations. What if you add this? What if you add that? What if you add that? And he was very excited to do that. I was very excited also to learn from him. And then at some point in the process of our collaboration, I started essentially dreaming about the piece. This is something that happens to me ever since I was a child. I started writing around the age of 8, and many times kind of those ideas would come to me in dreams, to the extent that like when I was working with Don Paul, I would even dream of our rehearsal. I could see him physically playing.
Wow.
Playing this thing, and then I would wake up and like write down what I remembered. But all of that was conditioned by this close collaboration and the ecosystem. You mentioned the idea of duality, which is really important. This piece was essentially, the inspiration was like an unfortunate experience that we had with a cat for Felipe, who had heart problems. We adopted him, and then he died soon thereafter. And that was the beginning of the pandemic. And I was thinking how important all these ephemeral things that we don't pay attention to, how important they are, and how essentially like happiness is like little micro moments that when they just disappear like that, then we realize that this is what was, this was actually happiness, you know, and I didn't know it, but it was happiness. And I wanted to give a certain kind of duality of the presence and the absence at the same time. So you notice at the very end of the piece, there's a kind of transfiguration of material where the performer takes off the mouthpiece, and then I use a lot of Don Paul's innovations in techniques without the mouthpiece to essentially bring this other level, the inner world of the saxophone out. You know, all those things that are happening without the reed, happening inside the instrument. I was inspired in doing so by a painting, one of my favorite painters, Dominikos Theotokopoulos, or more fondly known as El Greco. It's the death of Count Orgaz, and it shows, he was a virtuous person, and it shows the funeral, and like in the bottom part of the painting, it's all darkness and sadness, controlled sadness. You don't see anyone wailing, because they know this is a righteous person who has passed. And then when you look at the upper part of the painting, is full of light, and it's the soul of the Count that is being received by God. And I was thinking about this juxtaposition of darkness versus light, the momentary pain versus the eternal happiness, or the eternal peacefulness in that piece. And a little cat was the inspiration, but the subjects engaged there are much deeper.
Was there some of the techniques that you chose, but eventually you chose not to do?
No, I'm pretty, you know, I spent a lot of time researching or thinking about what it is that I want to do. So if, let's say, I will spend 6 months writing a piece, which is typical for me, 4 months will be just thinking. But thinking for hours and hours and hours and collecting information. Once I have it, the process of writing is extremely fast.
You know what you are going to do, and then it will be just the actions.
And the more I think about it, the more narrow the focus becomes. You know, we talk about silence, I try in my own thinking process to drive all that silence away and be left with the essence of what it is that I want to do. Once I know that, like, everything else takes over, you know, the received technique, you know, a little bit when you, maybe this resonates to you as a performer, like when you know the sound that you need for a particular piece, when you have the architecture in the mind, and you have, of course, your technical expertise and all of that, like almost like you know what to tell your body to do. in a similar way, I know what to tell my hand to do once I have the work in my ears.
And I know you use a lot of microtonality.
Yeah.
What does this mean to you?
My direction in that path is a little bit idiosyncratic, like a lot of things in my life. First, I noticed the microtones in nature. I remember one of my fondest childhood memories is that I was with my dad in an orange grove that we have in our paternal place of origin. It's a small village outside Sparta. It's called Amikle. My grandpa had tied a piece of rope between two branches, and there was a gust of wind, and it started vibrating. So my dad said it wouldn't be wonderful to transcribe that. So I started transcribing it, but I was a kid then, and I noticed like it was somewhere around F. But I noticed that the notes I had in my ears did not match what I was hearing. What I was hearing was a lot more beautiful than what I could play back on the piano. So there was like all these sounds that I heard around me that I found inspiring. None of that was conforming to the piano. So that was the first idea of trying to capture, even when we speak, my voice is notoriously monotonous and soporific, but imagine someone who is a good actor. I used to go to theater a lot in Greece, and they project in a large space, and there's a lot of nuance in the voice, and I could hear melodies in that nuance.
Yeah.
Those melodies were not piano melodies, they were something deeper. And then in conjunction with that, the second spark is when I started discovering extended possibilities of sounds, like for example multiphonics. There's a lot of sounds there that are not based on the piano tuning, and I was thinking, like a big part of my life as a teacher, as a composer, as a member in society, as a parent, is to try to find that kind of fragile, beautiful voice that exists in an instrument, in a student. That kind of like when I get like a glimpse of someone's personality, to just help them bring that out. So I hear all these sounds and all these pitches that are unique, fragile, and all of that. I'm trying to subvert the hierarchy of sound so that these elements come out.
I think you are really testing the audience's perception in the
Yes.
auditory process. Yeah. Did you imagine and envision this kind of music to have a bigger setting, or do you just wish it would just target it for a very intimate setting?
When I write, I think a lot about the performer. Like all of my pieces have specific people in mind, and I think of the audience, but in a slightly different way. I don't think about how the audience will receive it, but I think I want the audience to know exactly who I am. And then the audience has their own agency. They can reject that, they can get closer to it, they can ignore it, they can dislike it. All of that is fair, but what I'm giving is really who I am. And I think I try very hard to give the best version of myself in every piece. Not always successful, but I really try in every single piece. I promise you, even if it's not successful, that I try to give the best version of who I am as a musician, as a human being. That of course will evolve and change. So what resonance this will have with the audience, I don't know, but I know that whatever resonance it has, it will be not manipulated by me. I can very easily create effects that the audience will find impressive and like. But if I don't feel like doing it, I won't do it. I know that it will be the people that connect with my piece are people that are going to connect of their own volition, not because I manipulated them, and they're going to connect in a really deep way. It's a similar thing with like saying things to be liked or saying things that you actually mean. I think if you do the second, probably you will have fewer friends, but the friends that you have are going to be very real and last you for a really long time. And it's kind of a path that I've chosen in life.
I am very curious with one of your work, Pieta. This is a very emotionally charged work. Can you walk us a little bit about the preparation for this piece? Yeah.
So Pieta was a work that I did for a festival in Japan, in Takefu, which is organized by a wonderful Japanese composer, Toshio Sokawa. I should say my interaction with Mr. Hosokawa was brief, but it was very important. The year before I wrote Pietà, I went to the Takefu International Festival, which was also a competition, and I won the competition. And I got very, very good comments about the piece and all of that. But that was a piece where I think I was trying to show what I could do as a composer, like how clever I was with techniques and all of that. And it had a meaning, it was expressive and all that, but there was a lot of things that were being done in that piece because I could do it, not because necessarily I should do it or I wanted to do it. And Mr. Oshokawa, who's very, very, very perceptive, he said to me something that resonated with me, which was to don't hide your ideas in technique. You know, I was growing up, I was very interested in technique, and I studied compositional technique really in depth, like very passionate, and still am. Different techniques, all that. And I think that from a 20th century canon, I absorbed a lot of technical solutions, and in my mind, I always have like several options about doing something because I've studied so much. But what Mr. Oshokawa was instrumental in liberating in me is this idea of being direct. Yes, you can do this in more complicated, sophisticated ways, but don't hide the emotion and the intention. Because I won the competition, I was invited again to go to the festival, and I got a small commission to write Pietà. And at that time, it was right after that horrific earthquake in Japan. And I was thinking about a piece by Haydn, The Seven Last Words of Our Savior on the Cross. That piece is very unusual. It has, most of it is very slow music, very serene, and then it has this explosive thing. It's about an earthquake. So I thought it would be interesting to engage with a form like that. And Pietà is a theme that happens in Christian hagiography. It's about essentially Virgin Mary receiving the lifeless body of her son, and it has this idea of humility in it, like kind of, if you wish, the humility that we feel as humans in front of the force of nature. Because you know we have this grand idea about ourselves. We do incredible things, but then nature is by magnitude more powerful than we are. And again, it's this kind of shared humanity that you find in a catastrophe like that. I also must say that I have a lot of respect and a lot of interest in Japanese culture myself. I think in many cases I admire Japanese culture because they manage to combine the newest of the new with the oldest of the old. And as a Greek, I'm very interested in that. Because you know we also come from a very ancient culture, and sometimes I find that either we are stuck in the old or we are so thirsty with the new that we forget what the old is. So I have a lot of affection for many Japanese artists, a lot of fantastic musicians there, and a lot of admiration for elements of that culture.
Yeah, I think it's very fascinating that you bring all those elements in presenting the themes of timeless. I think this is a thing that I could see from your point of view of all the compositional works. Besides just memory, besides cultural identities. And when dealing with all those giant Asian histories or biblical stories that contain a lot of profound emotions, personally, like how do you process those emotions first?
I normally don't start by exploring text. It's mostly that I'm responding to a stimulus that I see, like for example, crossings. There was a stimulus that I felt I needed to react. Now I'm very politically aware, but I'm not an artist who engages in political art. I think that most of political art is an utter failure because it seeks to preach and indoctrinate people. And what I try to do is bear testimony and try to understand the universality of a problem. And in this universality, I find those ancient texts to be amazing because, I mean, there's a reason that they have survived for so long. And they also document some of humanity's earliest efforts to understand very complicated problems. And I find that there are some messages there that apply to all of us, regardless of where we're coming from or what language we speak.
So in one of your collaborations with Marcia, the
Yeah,
artist,
yeah.
yeah, you have used a lot of the visual aspects and integrate that into the score. What are some of the challenges you had facing during that
So,
collaboration?
Marcia Alexander Clark is a very, very special person.
Mm.
She's in her mid 80s now. She won a Guggenheim award in visual arts in her late 70s. It's a human being that I have a lot of respect for. She's essentially self-taught, had an extremely difficult
Mm.
life.
Mm.
Also, like she became an important artist at a time where was somewhat unusual for women. Not some, it was very unusual for women to pursue that path. Even like if you look in music in the history of modernism, for example, there were all these people that were thinking outside the box and all of that. But when it came to supporting work of women composers, they were just as old-fashioned as their more
Yeah.
conservative colleagues. Great example, recently in England Conservatory we had a festival that honored the music of wives of Ruth Crawford Seeger. I think
Yeah.
the life of Ruth Crawford Seeger is very indicative of that. There are many things, especially in serialist technique, that she did first, uh, and then kind of social expectations and some political issues kind of muted her work and did not provide the space that she needed to fully unravel her potential. Marcia was inspirational to me in this respect, and because she took all of these difficulties that happened to her and turned them into art in an amazing way. So, first of all, her visual works are very musical because I noticed that they were timed in a
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
interesting way. Then she has these rectangles, like small rectangles through which you can see moving images.
Yeah.
In Escuchando, a lot of it is about nature, but filtered through the perspective of someone that almost is not allowed to see.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's like this tiny window through which you can see
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really inspiring. And another thing that I found interesting is that the title is listening. And I thought it was very interesting that
Mm.
for a visual artist, the title was listening. The way we met is that she came to a performance of Crossings at Disney Hall in Los Angeles, and she just approached me like, "I really liked your piece. Here's my card."
Oh wow.
I was like, "Oh,
That's
okay."
very courage.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm usually like a little bit shy about those things, but I said,
Oh.
"Okay, let's check," and
Mm.
I was really impressed. So this is how Escuchando started.
Mm.
Then I basically interpreted this film
Mm.
um, as musical structure in motion. So the architecture of those sounds created for me the timelines, the music. And I tried to do with the sounds that I pursued a parallel universe to what was happening in
Mm.
Escuchando.